From mouth-watering flashbacks hinting at a wholly satisfying tale set in a galaxy far, far away, to many a cameo making you wonder why said characters weren't being given the spotlight instead. From Whatculture, and these are film and TV that were secretly hidden in film and TV shows. Jimmy Woo and Darcy Lewis are on the case, WandaVision. There was actually another compelling concept flaunted throughout Marvel Studios' first Disney show that many were left unexpectedly clamoring for. Forming the most unlikely of partnerships over the course of the surreal comedy drama series, Ant-Man's Jimmy Woo and Thor's Darcy Lewis joining forces to crack the case of Wanda Maximoff and whatever the hell was going down in Westview, set the stage for what could no doubt be the small screen gift that keeps on giving. As already pitched by Teen Wolf actor Stephen Ford around the time the show arrived on the scene last year, the idea of Jimmy Woo trying to unpack some of the most bizarre cases the MCU has to offer, alongside partner Dr. Lewis, could make for Marvel Studios' own brilliant answer to the X-Files. And with Kat Dennings herself noting that she'd hop into a Lewis-Woo spin-off in a heartbeat, there's every chance the unanticipated highlights of WandaVision could actually make this dream a reality. A certain Scarlet Witch would be proud.
Arnold Schwarzenegger's Hamlet, Last Action Hero. There's a strong argument to be made that Arnold Schwarzenegger's cult action comedy Last Action Hero is one of the most criminally underrated blockbusters of the last 30 years. An inventive, ahead-of-its-time action flick that audiences of 1993 just weren't ready for. But co-writer Shane Black wrote a minute-long scene in the 131-minute tentpole that suggested something even more entertaining than the meta-deconstruction of Schwarzenegger's career that we actually ended up with. And that is, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Hamlet. Now, early on in the film, Arnie mega fan Danny is watching Laurence Olivier's 1948 adaptation of Hamlet when he suddenly daydreams about a more amped-up version starring Schwarzenegger. The brief but hilarious fake trailer shows Arnie chomping cigars, throwing bad guys through windows, mowing others down with a damn Uzi, and blowing up a castle while acting out the Bard's legendary play. As much as this scene is basically a joke about A-list movie stars being cast in projects that they're totally unsuited for, the gag is brilliantly crafted enough that fans have been wishing that they actually got to see the real deal ever since. But alas, it never came to be. Beckett, a Star Wars story. Solo, a Star Wars story. Though Solo, a Star Wars story failed to make much of a dent at the box office, it was a pretty good movie, despite the fact that few were clamoring for an origin story to demystify Han Solo's early life. By far the strongest aspect of Solo is its early vibe as a big-budget sci-fi heist film, where the focus is trained on a high-wire hold-up and the limelight is frequently stolen away from Han by his mentor Tobias Beckett, played with grim, gritty glee by Woody Harrelson. Ditching all of the desperation to tie the story to the wider Star Wars mythos and just focusing on Beckett and his gang dealing with the galaxy's criminal underworld, namely the Crimson Dawn Syndicate, would have been plenty material for a nicely self-contained spin-off. Obviously, Disney would have never have given Beckett a Star Wars story a $300 million budget, but in purely artistic terms, Han Solo ended up perhaps being the least interesting and appealing part of his own movie.
And the rise of Gus, Breaking Bad / Better Call Saul. Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul's many compelling breadcrumbs offered up about the backstory of the mesmerizing Gustavo Fring have led to a solid number of folks understandably begging Vince Gilligan and co. to commit to bringing the Chicken Man's earlier years to life, Giancarlo Esposito included. Though definitely acting as one of the most deliciously mysterious entities that Breaking Bad sphere has to offer, both shows have already teased glimpses at his earlier steps into the criminal underworld via flashbacks and throwaway lines, with one particularly heartbreaking scene involving Fring's friend and partner Max being murdered in front of his very eyes by Hector Salamanca, informing much of Gustavo's cold actions from there on out, for example. So you can only imagine what sort of meat Gilligan and the gang could get stuck into in the years leading up to Fring's immigration to Mexico in the late 80s, with Esposito himself clearly salivating at the thought of delivering on those hints at the magnetic figure's hidden past. As he put it, as much as I've wanted so much as an actor to explore Gus's previous life, Gus's life in Chile, all these things, there is a yearning inside me and I keep coming back to the rise of Gus. It fits the puzzle, and we could see where he had come from and maybe explore more of who he really is underneath the mask. And while Esposito would also understandably add that both Gilligan and Peter Gould deserve some time out after so long immersed in this dark world, few would refuse the chance to see the rise of Gus finally get the attention it deserves.
Scrat's Adventures. any Ice Age movie. It's truly fascinating that despite having barely 10 minutes of screen time throughout the 5 Ice Age movies, Scrat is surely the series' most popular and iconic character. Scrat is a saber-toothed squirrel who is absolutely obsessed with storing his precious acorn for the winter, a quest which becomes increasingly hilariously outlandish with each passing installment, whereby he ends up responsible for the separation of the continents amongst other things. The Scrat scenes are typically the most entertaining part of each film, effectively serving as a short film that is pigeonholed in the middle of the main story. And because Scrat can't speak, there's a universal charm to these vignettes, not unlike classic silent films. The producers clearly appreciated Scrat's popularity as he starred in a number of separate short films, but honestly, why not give him his own movie? I mean, you could certainly argue that 100 minutes of Scrat might be too much of a good thing, but a more modest 70-minute animation, perhaps direct to streaming, chronicling Scrat's continued adventures, that would definitely work. Wenwu the Conqueror, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Marvel Studios' Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings was a rock-solid introduction to the title character. But you know what? Let's be honest, wasn't he totally overshadowed by his villainous father Wenwu? This becomes apparent from the film's terrific prologue sequence, which quickly chronicles Wenwu's past, where he discovers the mysterious 10 rings that give him basically godlike powers and allow him to become an unrivaled conqueror throughout human history. Though the prologue speeds through Wenwu's origin story, it's clear that there's a whole other movie's worth of material just waiting to be exploited here, of a man who unstoppably exerted his will upon any land he set foot upon. Tie this to his later discovery of the mythical land of Ta Lo, his romance with Ying Li, her murderer, and his subsequent attempts to bring her back to life, and you have got one hell of a story without even mentioning his son.
Another season with the OG gang, Scrubs Med School. Seemingly waving goodbye to all things Sacred Heart with a rather touching my-finale conclusion to Season 8 of the zany sitcom, news of Scrubs actually being semi-revived for a 9th almost spin-off season by the name of Scrubs Med School left many nursing a pool of mixed emotions. And sure enough, instead of decisively handing the ball over to the next batch of interns or med students in this case, the decision was made to rope in many of the OG docs for various main and supporting roles, with their constant charming presence unfortunately killing off any hopes the likes of Dave Franco and his fellow newcomers had of stepping out of Zach Braff, John C. McGinley and co.'s shadows. In truth, all this half-assed attempt at luring folks back for one more round of Scrubs Light did was remind fans that they had actually stuck around for the previous 8 seasons because of the original players they'd invested countless hours of time into watching grow as bizarre humans and just about competent doctors. So would it have been that difficult to simply keep the action within a not demolished hospital and have the likes of JD, Turk and Dr. Cox continue acting as central side-splitting mentors alongside everyone from Judy Reyes' Carla to Sarah Sharka's Elliot in their natural habitat instead, all while lacing in the show's tried and tested nuggets of heartbreaking drama and ushering in another generation? Apparently so.
The heroism of Dory Miller. Pearl Harbor. Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor may feature spectacularly crafted action sequences, but it's also a wildly bloated 3-hour endurance trial with far too much focus placed on a dull love triangle between Ben Affleck, Kate Beckinsale, and Josh Hartnett's fairly uninteresting characters. Now, the attack on Pearl Harbor is absolutely a story worthy of the big screen blockbuster treatment, but when the film features so many actual people who were on the ground that day, why place the focus on 3 forgettable fictional characters? Perhaps the most interesting, inspired by true event story, is that of Petty Officer Second Class Doris Dory Miller, a black messman who without any training took control of an anti-aircraft gun during the attack and shot down several Japanese planes. As a result, Miller was the first black American to be awarded the coveted Navy Cross, which any way you cut it is a far worthier and more potential riddled story than 3 folks just having their romance torn apart by war. This disparity was so glaringly obvious that Matt Stone and Trey Parker even made fun of it in their puppet actioner Team America World Police with the song The End of an Act, featuring the line, "I need you like Cuba Gooding needed a bigger part, he's way better than Ben Affleck." The Congo Ground War. Independence Day Resurgence. Despite being a sequel to one of the most iconic and commercially successful blockbusters ever made, Independence Day Resurgence largely came and went with a whisper, failing to make much of a dent at all with the general public. And it probably didn't help that filmmaker Roland Emmerich set up a way more interesting interesting movie with a single flippant line of dialogue, only to then dismiss it for the rest of the runtime. As we're introduced to Ubuntu, the Congolese warlord of the National Republic of Ubuntu, it's mentioned that the nation of Ubuntu fought a decade-long ground war against the pockets of alien resistance still residing on Earth following the events of the first film. Sadly, we don't get any sort of flashback to accompany this, which sounds like a far cooler concept than the scattered, unfocused mess of generic alien action that we ended up with. Watching the Ubuntu force take on the remaining aliens in an intense ground skirmish with limited weaponry no less could have made for a lean, no-nonsense standalone sequel or indeed spin-off that wouldn't have required such a grotesquely bloated budget. Sadly, due to Resurgence colossally underperforming at the box office, it's safe to say that the franchise is pretty much dead now.
The Master and Apprentice Tales, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Heading back over to tantalizing flashback territory now, and to an epic sequence that served up arguably the most exciting unexplored avenues Disney Plus's recent Obi-Wan Kenobi series had to offer. Outside of that long-awaited rematch of the century, of course. I am talking about the bout of Jedi lightsaber practice that depicted a digitally de-aged Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen taking a duel down memory lane in Part 5 of the small-screen link between Episodes 3 and 4. While the sequence involving Darth Vader remembering the lessons his former master attempted to teach him in the time before Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars breaking out acts as a way of informing the events of the episode itself. In reality, all the adored flashback did was leave fans angling for more adventures and lessons to be played out between the two in all their live-action glory in the coming years. Should Obi-Wan Kenobi find itself being gifted a second season that sees McGregor's Kenobi pit the brains of Force Ghost Master Qui-Gon Jinn, there's every chance a few more pre- or mid-Clone War events could be revisited. But why not just fully commit to the spin-off Master and Apprentice tales now while the lightsaber's hot? The leading lights are not getting any younger.
The expansion of the ISS, Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets. Luc Besson's Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets may have been a critical and commercial disappointment, but its incredible opening scene suggested the seeds of a far more interesting movie. The gorgeous, affecting introductory montage depicts the development of the International Space Station, which later became the Intergalactic Space Station, over the course of several centuries. Set to the inspired musical choice of David Bowie's Space Oddity, the scene begins in 1975 and quickly leaps forward, chronicling the meetings of astronauts from different countries aboard the space station. Later, humanity makes contact with many far-flung alien species on this station, optimistically suggesting the community-expanding possibilities of cooperation amongst intelligent life in the universe. Though the sequence sadly only lasts about 3 minutes, it clearly could have been fleshed out into a feature-length exploration of human progress throughout the centuries, rather than turning into the more messy, pulpy action-adventure movie that we ended up with. Logan Goes to War. X-Men Origins Wolverine. Arguably, no superhero movie has so spectacularly thrown away its awesome potential quicker or more blatantly than X-Men Origins Wolverine. The film's unforgettable opening title sequence shows Logan and his half-brother Victor fighting together throughout a century of modern human history. We see the pair as soldiers in the American Civil War, both World Wars and the Vietnam War, with the added twist that they of course use their superhuman abilities to best their foes while being completely invulnerable to conventional weaponry. It's a terrifically assembled action sequence that snappily showcases the potential of a superhero war movie starring the duo, which would have been a far snazzier thing than the generic superhero origin story that we ended up with, and probably would have been less expensive as well. It's a textbook example of an awesome scene in a bad movie, and it's a shame that a director like Logan's James Mangold never ended up aligned with such an inspired idea. With an R rating, this would have been absolute dynamite.
The early days of Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy, the Book of Boba Fett. In all honesty, there was likely actually two far superior shows hiding within Disney Plus's most disappointing live-action Star Wars entry to date. But away from the outstanding Chapter 5 Return of the Mandalorian deviation that acted as the Book of Boba Fett's finest hour, and a din-jarring detour some would have preferred to have stuck with instead of the many Tusken flashbacks and biker gang shenanigans, the Beskar-sporting badass's quest to deliver a gift to his little pal Grogu actually planted another more fascinating seed that fans would no doubt enjoy watching grow in its own live-action corner on Disney+. With Mando's trip to the child giving folks the first look at Luke Skywalker's eventual Jedi Academy literally and figuratively starting to take shape, it did feel as though Lucasfilm were testing the waters somewhat to see how fans would react to their latest attempt to digitally de-age Mark Hamill's iconic master. And after the largely positive response to Luke's lessons with Grogu on the Forest World, reported talk of the legendary Jedi now possibly getting his own series shouldn't come as too much of a surprise at this point. So if that does end up being the case, here's hoping Disney and Lucasfilm actually conjure up enough storyline meat to justify an entire show being dedicated to this breakthrough in technology, eh?
Black Ops priests battle demons. Demonic. It sure isn't surprising that District 9 director Neil Blomkamp's new film Demonic turned out to be an abject critical failure, but damn if its trailer didn't suggest a much more interesting film encased inside. Near the end of the trailer for the sci-fi horror film, a character says the Vatican has been funding a Black Ops unit using priests like soldiers, accompanied by clips of badass priests kitting up to do battle with the primary demonic entity. Except this is a classic example of marketing bait and switch, as the advertised battle never takes place. When protagonist Carly arrives on the scene, the Black Ops priests have all been killed off-screen by the demon. It's one of the lousiest and most cynical anticlimaxes in any recent movie. There was presumably a budgetary decision intended to keep costs down, and possibly due to the logistical challenges of shooting an involved set piece during the height of the pandemic. But those excuses don't make the end result sting much less though, because Blomkamp directing an all-out war between geared-up super soldier priests and supernatural beasties was so much cooler than the scarcely coherent mishmash of sci-fi and horror tropes that viewers ended up getting saddled with.
The Isaiah Bradley story, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Though the definite passing of the Captain America mantle to Sam Wilson and the reintroducing of the likes of Baron Zemo were both handled admirably over the course of the MCU's second live-action Disney Plus TV project, there's simply no denying that an unexpectedly much more riveting tale was largely left unexplored over the course of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That being Isaiah Bradley's all-but-erased chapter in MCU history as one of the first folks post-Steve Rogers to survive the super serum experiment. Carl Lumbly has already movingly recounted in the series the fact that his Bradley was at the center of a ton of covert missions back in the 1950s, one of which even involved him colliding with the Winter Soldier himself and taking half of his arm for good measure. Now, who wouldn't want to see that hard-hitting collision and many others like it play out on the small screen, I say? And the tragic events that led to Bradley's eventual imprisonment before being experimented on by Hydra and ignored by the history books would also make for some impactful television, whilst also adding further depth to Lumbly's outstanding turn in Falcon and the Winter Soldier and his no doubt stellar upcoming work in Captain America New World Order. With Falcon and the Winter Soldier creator Malcolm Spellman also responding with a swift "for sure" when asked how interested he'd be in delivering a Bradley prequel, you wouldn't bet against the Isaiah Bradley story finally being told before long.